the cloud. We are good. Okay. All right. Well, good evening, morning, afternoon, wherever you guys are on Earth. Wanted to thank you all for coming on board with this. Had not taught this particular class before, elements of it, but not this particular one. So I wanted to make sure that I covered enough of the understanding of the digestive system. This isn't just about, matter of fact, very little of it is the exact thing that you should eat for your, well, should have for your dogs. That's for you to determine based upon what you see. And I'm going to try to explain to you what you're looking at and what those things mean from the standpoint of nutrition and how dogs are. So Kinsey's going to, well, I'll let her talk about what she's going to do here.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Kinsey, and I'm here to help with questions and whatnot. Due to the size of the class, as well as the amount of content that Nelson has to cover, we will not be taking questions throughout the class, but you can type them into the chat and I will copy them, and I will be saving them so that we can answer them at a later time. So I just wanted to let you guys know that, that the expectation is that you guys will just be receiving the information, but you can type in your questions for me and I'll make sure that we get to them at some point, probably after the class.
Yeah, because I have an outline of about 25 pages of information as an outline that I want to cover with you. Probably won't get to all of my outline, as I usually don't, because I want to make sure that I have more information than you can possibly take in anyway. So that's the way my classes go, as those of you who are taking them know. So I am going to start in. I'm going to share screen, and we are going to look at the presentation. I'm going to maximize that. Get this out of the way. Go from the beginning. The beginning is a good place to go from. So, all right. So this course is about the canine digestive system and nutrition. The nutritional aspects we will talk about in terms of how it affects canines themselves. So not all foods, as you guys know, are good for canines, just like not all foods are good for humans, even though we're omnivores. But we're going to get into that. So I'm going to go ahead and start through this. For those of you who have followed this but don't really know what the Canine-Human Relationship Institute is about, it was set up essentially to be the university, the advanced university for professional dog trainers, but also behaviorists, vets, vet techs, anybody that wants to learn more about the nature, language, motivations of dogs and canines in general as well. You know, with a number of years, a number of decades in, trying to simply set this up to have an educational system, an advanced educational system for anyone that wants to learn more about dogs, including the neurobiology of dogs, which is where our system works, is with how the dog's brain works versus how human brains work, and how they see things, how they understand their universe versus ours. So that's what the Institute is about. There's a number of courses. We have a number of courses that have not been yet posted on the website, but will be soon. We keep developing. Well, let me put it this way. They are developed. They haven't been put out there for public consumption yet, but I'm still trying to work out next year's schedule. It's close but we're also working with our European partners to do some classes over there next year, and we're trying to work out the exact dates. So that's why that has not been published yet. So we're looking at Switzerland, Netherlands, and possibly Poland for next year for workshops over there. Actually, course one and other workshops. So just so you know. Okay, so we will go on. First thing is, this is just an introduction essentially to animal nutrition in the first place, and then we will hone in on predators and predatory aspects of what animals eat and why their digestive systems have advanced to the way they are and why ours are different. So, oops, somebody's not muted. If you can look, make sure that you're muted, please. Okay, so different types of animals eat things. Herbivores eat plants, not meat. Now they eat insects, so they're actually insectivores, even though they don't know it because of the plants that they eat too. So in the grasses, there's grasshoppers and all sorts of things that they eat as well. But the vast majority, the bulk of what they eat, 98%, are plants. Those digestive systems are adapted to process carbohydrates, and carbohydrates are complex sugars, frankly, and that's what all plants have in them. And those carbohydrates are starchy materials. Their digestive systems are able to process those things because of the length of the digestive tracts, which can be up to 10 times their body length. And actually the mass of the stomach or stomachs in theirs is a small percentage compared to, for instance, carnivores. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So they can be up to 10 times their body length, and due to the difficulty of processing and breaking down plant materials, it has to be that long. It takes that long to have that process happen. They have much more elaborate digestive systems. So, for instance, birds have craw and then a second stomach and all sorts of things like that. So, cattle have several different areas, including the cecum, which we have a non-developed but somewhat existing cecum. That's where your what is it?
Don't ask me, I don't know that.
Yeah, that's where your appendix comes in. There's a little pocket there, and that begins the large intestine. But the cecum is an area that is necessary for animals that do work with plants as well. So they have square and flat molars for grinding and chewing, and the jaws that move side to side. Now, interesting fact is we have jaws that articulate, not just open and closing to cut or tear meat, but we can chew and grind slightly, not the way cows do, or any type of large ungulate. They actually move side to side very well, and that's the way they're built. So those square flat molars are basically grinding stones for plant materials. And they have carbohydrate. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Carbohydrate digesting enzymes, which is amylase, in their saliva. Amylase in the saliva then mixes with that material, and it starts breaking down that material as it goes to the stomach, or in the case of cattle, their first stomach. So the saliva mixes with the food during the grinding and chewing process, and that's the mixture that they have to have. And that helps, breaks down, starts the process of breaking down the cellular structure of plants. The length and complexity of the digestive system allows for the time for biological breakdown. In other words, it has to be in the system long enough for it to ferment from biotics, from microbes. And that's why they have such a long digestive system is to allow that time and all of those processes to happen. So it's fermenting inside their body for the plant materials. That's how it processes. It's not them that processes it. It's actually the microbiomes in their gut. They have multiple chambers for breakdown, processing, and absorption. So all of those things happen at different points. Some of it actually at the cecum, and a lot of absorption of salts and some phytonutrients happen at that very end as they get to the large intestine. And then another secretion inside the body happens, and it helps liquefaction so that it pushes it on out. So that's an example of herbivores. Omnivores are evolved to eat plants and animals. They have medium length digestive systems. They have flat molars like we do, and sharp teeth at the front for both grinding and for tearing. Saliva does have to contain amylase, so that as we grind and mix things, it does the same thing as herbivores for those plant materials, that starchy type of materials, which is the carbohydrates and digestion. So it's better suited to meat and fatty based materials than herbivore type digestive tracts, because, for instance, we don't have multiple stomachs, and we don't have fermenting inside of us, just a minor level in our intestines. So we as humans, we're omnivores, but we're better suited to eating meats than we are any of the carbohydrates. Shorter tracts require a system to work harder and longer than it was meant to do. So we've adapted to a longer system simply because we eat those starchy things. Meats are processed easier than plant materials and allow the gut to rest in between, whereas carbohydrates break the normal chain of energy usage by spiking blood sugars, then having to be stored as fat. So the process is, as you eat carbohydrates, that's virtually all plant materials, soluble plant materials, those that are able to absorb water and the nutrients being taken out by amylase and other enzymes. As we process that, what happens is those complex sugars get broken down and get absorbed and go directly into the bloodstream. And so we have sugar spikes from that. That's why it feels so good initially and very filling, because of the fiber aspect of just mass on our stomachs for grains, breads, potatoes, rice, all of those types of things, high glycemic index foods. And so our body has to fight that sugar spike every time by producing tons of insulin. And that's where we can become diabetic, because we overeat carbohydrates and sugar. The reason our bodies crave sugar, fats, and salts is because those out in nature were not very plentiful. And so when we got them, the body wanted some of that. And so genetically, it's our tastes, if you will. And what the body wants are those things that were not very plentiful, so that you would binge on them when you found them. Because we didn't eat grass until a few thousand years ago. That was the first one was rice, but wheat and barley and all of those things. And we eventually got corn. And those are very complex sugars. The reason they taste good is because of the sugars in them. And so we craved more of that back then, when it was harder to get, when we were hunter-gatherers, and you would gather a few nuts and a few berries and have to hunt down non-fat animals. Game animals aren't that fat. And so we would replace those fatty deposits with carbohydrates, which, when you reduce the amount of blood sugar, then it goes to storage, which is fat. So the more carbohydrates you eat, the more starchy stuff you eat, the more fat you store up. And the normal chain of energy is to eat meat or some low glycemic index non-carbohydrate foods, and then it goes straight to the energy that you're using, and then the fat gets used too. So anything that's stored immediately gets used. When you put carbohydrates in your body, us, dogs, whatever, then what happens is it goes as a fat storage. So we keep storing up layers of fat and never using them because it doesn't really get used that way. So we're actually truncating, cutting off the normal cycle within the body of using our fat stores. So that's why, when you have heavy grains and carbohydrates of different types, even if it's protein, it's still carbohydrate based, and we'll see that in a little while. Then you're actually not doing your dog or yourself a favor. Okay. So omnivores can survive on starches, but it causes health problems long term. Meats are more efficient means of feeding, but not as readily available and plentiful as plant materials in the wild or historically. Now we produce everything to the extent that we want to. So we have all the stuff that tastes good to us all the time, and we overeat, and we're overfeeding our dogs too. So that's omnivores. So carnivores is the third classification, and they are majority meat eaters. They have a short, simple, very acidic digestive system, and it's developed to break down proteins and fats from animals quickly. Meat does break down quickly in the body. Dogs and cats have an exceptional ability to secrete hydrochloric acid, facilitating the breakdown of protein, and it kills bacteria and decaying meats. It's the reason that dogs can eat roadkill that's been laying there for days and not throw everything up and be sick in the hospital. We couldn't do that because we don't have that. We actually have base level enzymes in our stomach. So theirs is highly acidic. We'll go into detail on that later. They have sharp teeth for slicing meat, not grinding. The elongated teeth for killing and tearing. So those what we call canines, for a reason, is to puncture and hang on to that animal as our other pack members also take part within that and bleed out the animal or tire it out. So the molars are also sharp edged to cut and shatter bone. They're narrower as well. So with carnivores, those molars and premolars, very narrow, and they still have sharp edges on them. And that's just for crunching on bone. The jaws move vertically to provide shearing and cutting motion only. They do this. Rather than grinding side to side, their jaws don't move side to side. And that's a description of a dog. So they have, well, I shouldn't say no, well, they do. They have no salivary amylase. They have some pancreatic amylase, but that's a burden downstream in the body. In other words, it doesn't really get processed as part of the process through the stomach. So anyway, it's an inefficient way to process carbohydrates, and it truncates that natural cycle of energy usage and storage. Feeding plant materials makes the pancreas overwork instead of supporting and process the fats, organs, and protein muscles. Okay, so that's what a carnivore does. They are not plant eaters generally. Now let's go into this is actually I'm going to increase the size of this so that you can see this a little bit. Okay, so we'll talk about anatomy, and you've got predators. This is a high-end predator, which we'll talk about. Mid-level, this animal, leafy plants and grasses. This is most primates. These are humans here. And so there's a lot of optimal diets of meats and plants, leafy plants, fruits, veggies, nuts, legumes, seeds. Same thing for us, except we actually have better chance with meats. we became a kind of a half predator over a few million years after we separated from the rest of them, primates. Kind of an interesting thing. It talks about vision and color, brain chemistry, the circadian rhythm, the size of the mouth and how it opens, the jaw type, whether it's simply an embedded up and down motion or it can fully articulate, has jaw angles and jaw joint locations. So you will be able to go back over this. Since I'm recording this, I'm going to allow you guys to go back over this, and you can look at these charts again if you wish. But go down here to teeth, the canines, long and sharp for the predators, rudimentary and dull, dull or short, rudimentary and short for humans. Salivary glands, small, small, large, large, large. So the plant eaters are the ones like us that are omnivores. They have large salivary glands, and the chemistry, salivary chemistry with the, you see the predators is acidic, and with us it's alkaline. So it's on the other end of the scale. No carb digesting enzymes on either of these. And all the rest of us have that. Stomach capacity is 60 to 7% of the total volume of digestive tract. So the stomach itself, the stomach size, is 60 to 70% of the entire volume of their digestive tract. Whereas, you know, I lost my place, sorry. Stomach capacity. So whereas we have 21 to 27% of the total capacity of the digestive tract is in our stomach. So predators have to eat large amounts of meat at one time because they may only be successful 1 out of 11 times and not eat for 4 days. So they can, for instance, wolves can eat up to 22 pounds of meat in one sitting, but they may not eat again for many days. So, and they also have to process that quickly because they can't be bogged down like plant eaters can. So that's why their stomach acidity, for instance, is less than or equal to a pH of 1. So on the scale of acidity, 1 to 7 is neutral, and then 14 is base. We're on the alkaline end of base. Our acidity here is pH of 4 to 5, and all the somewhat plant eaters or omnivores have that. Okay, so colon type, simple, simple, complex, complex. Ours is somewhat complex. So colon length, shorts, longs. So you see how our digestive systems have developed based upon what we are. And it tells you what to feed your dogs. So introduction. So what is a predator? In the animal world, the specialization, predators eat other animals. So about 1 to 2.7 billion years ago, we had microbial life. And about 1 billion years ago, we started having mobile predatory specialists. In other words, they had the ability to move around and predate on other animals, microbes, etc. We had sauropods then around 315 to 320 million years ago. Now, those were proto-mammals. Those were the sauropods. So that long ago, before dinosaurs, actually. Then we had mammals starting, what we call crown mammals, which were kind of proto-mammals as well, somewhere between 170 and 230 million years ago. That's somewhat in debate still. The creodonts then were what became the predatory lines of modern animals, the cat line, the bear line, and the canine line. So at about 80 million years ago, primates, our our line came into existence separate from the rest of mammals. And then the canine bear line, which was the last line to split, was about 37 million years ago. And that's Leptosian was the first canine line. Hominids then, somewhere between 7.5 to 8 million years ago, hominids, our direct line of primates, came into being, and the human lines about 2.3 million years ago. Why is this important? So that you see how long some of these things have developed genetically, and the reason that our digestive systems are the way they are is by what we eat, from where we were, what we hunt, etc., and how we hunt. Okay. So what's a carnivore? Okay, well, there's different levels of carnivore specializations. What are called hyper carnivores are obligates. They rely mostly just solely on meat. About 70% and up are considered hyper carnivores. The mesocarnivores are the fluctuative, and they also consume stuff other than meat. So 30 to 70% meat necessary in their diets. Hypocarnivores are less than 30% meat. Okay, so we have hyper, meso, and hypo. Some detailed information about carnivores. The post-carnassial molars, in other words, your molars and premolars back here, the volume expands of those for hypocarnivores. In other words, like us, our molars are much wider than a cat's, for instance. So it expands in volume for hypocarnivores and decreases for hypercarnivores. In hypocarnivores, hypercarnivores, and mesocarnivores, mandibles do not move side to side. In other words, they cannot chew. They will ingest plant material as an emetic to induce vomiting. In other words, they have something that's upsetting their stomach. They need to clean themselves out. They'll chew grasses and stuff like that to throw up to get that out of there. So it's self-medicating, in other words. So that's what they use plant material for. That ought to tell you how they should be fed. Hypocarnivores, the mandibles articulate side to side to allow for chewing and grinding. That's us. We're a carnivore, but we're a hypocarnivore. So our omnivores can eat meat and plant materials. Some carnivores are insectivores. In other words, they only eat insects. So some of the smaller rodents and things like that are actually carnivores, they may be hypo or even mesocarnivores, but they eat insects rather than what we would consider animal life. The hypercarnivores and mesocarnivores most have very few copies of amylase, either salivaric or pancreatic. So either in the saliva or in the pancreas, which means they have little ability to process starches or survive on them at all for long periods. Okay. So carnivore classifications, hypercarnivores, some of those are listed here: crocodiles, owls, shrikes, which is another type of bird, eagles, vultures, felids, which is, well, anyway, wild canids, meaning wolves, dolphins, snakes, groupers, piranhas, sharks, cats. And by the way, cats have to consume meat daily because they cannot produce retinol, taurine, arginine, or arachidonic acid. Okay, so cats cannot be anything but almost pure meat eaters. Mesocarnivores, coyotes, foxes, civets, martens, raccoons, skunks, mongoose, otters, lynx, and dogs. So your dog is a mesocarnivore. In other words, it's in that 30 to 70% range of having to have meat, actual meat. Hypocarnivores are most bears, pigs, and humans. By the way, I say most bears because polar bears eat 90% meat, but pandas don't eat any meat at all. They only eat plants. So bears are very wide ranged in how they are. These are the hypocarnivores are known as omnivores. Now, there's been a lot of reason I wanted to do this class is to kind of wipe away some of the haze of modern thinking that dogs are omnivores. They are capable of eating other things, starches, grains, carbohydrates, but that's not how their system is made. Doesn't mean that that's good for them. So canines, let's focus in on canines. So we've got wolves, which is Canis lupus, right? And then kuons, which are the foxes, civets, and then dogs. We've got Canis lupus familiaris. As a matter of fact, we used to call them Canis familiaris, but because of genetics now, we know that they're 99.3% the same genetic as a wolf. So they've been reclassified as Canis lupus familiaris under the wolf label. So now we get to dogs. Their digestive system tract is relatively short, okay? Predators, in this case dogs, have larger stomachs because generally in the wild they would eat fewer times and they would eat as much as they could to carry it and process it. They have highly acidic stomach fluids to break down meat, fats, and even bone because the pH is 1 to 2 in their stomach, even with food in it. Highly acidic hydrochloric acid. The hinge jaw doesn't chew or grind food. Dog has no salivary amylase, and dogs do have pancreatic amylase, but depending on the breed of dog, which we'll see here, they don't have many copies of it.
Could you share the pH levels of the human just to compare?
4 to 5. So we're much more towards the neutral end. If we had 1 to 2, your stomach would be eaten away. You wouldn't even have a stomach left. Okay. The digestive tract in dog is responsible for 70% of the immune system. So literally how they eat is their health. They have, now here's the key, guys. They have an omnivorous ability, but a carnivorous bias. But some ancient breeds, which we'll talk about in a minute, don't have an omnivorous ability either, because they never developed those amylase bases to be able to process something other than meat. So dogs in their digestive system have an undeveloped cecum. The cecum is the little pocket where in our body on the right-hand side, our small intestine empties into the large intestine, and there's a little pocket before it goes up. And that pocket is what absorbs salts, phosphates, other things. And this is where at the bottom of that cecum is where we have our appendix. And so that little pocket is to help develop a little bit of microbiome in that to help process some of those starches and things and absorb some material. Dogs don't have that at all. They go straight from small intestine, which is a short tract in itself, to the large intestine. Their large intestine doesn't wrap around like us. Okay. So the bacterial flora is very ill equipped for plant fiber digestion. They don't have the time. Their bacteria in their gut really isn't there to break down those plants. They don't have any time to ferment. And if they do have so much bacteria in that type that ferments, then you've got a sick dog. So, and dogs share 99% of genetics with wolf ancestors. Again, dogs are now classified as Canis lupus familiaris. So differences in dog breeds. So amylase is an enzyme that breaks down starchy carbohydrates. Okay. Ancient breed dogs, dingoes, Siberian Huskies, Malamutes, Chow Chow, Shar-Pei, Samoyeds, Afghan Hounds, Salukis, Akitas, Basenjis, and the Greenland sled dog, which if you've ever seen a Greenland sled dog, it looks like a husky in Greenland. But they're their own separate breed that go back about 5,000 years. They were all northern breed dogs at that point. So what we have is the northern breeds and the East Asian breeds, and then we have dingoes, which go back about 9,500 years. All of these animals go back somewhere between 2,000 to 30,000 years ago. Some ancient breeds, the Siberian Husky and the dingo, have the lowest number of copies of amylase, and that's all pancreatic. There's no salivary amylase, so that doesn't mix in the stomach. It mixes further down the line and is less efficient. So Siberian Husky and a dingo only have 2 copies of amylase, which is very, very little. And they both require 97% meat in their diet. Malamutes, Greenland sled dogs have very low levels in amylase in the pancreas as well, and can't process starch as well. So all of those 4 breeds, if you have those, if you deal with them, if you have a mix of those, just know that it's possible that they don't have any way to process starches in the way that other breeds do. Humans have up to 20 copies of amylase, and that's even been found back 120,000 years based on remains in human settlements. In other words, the corporal remains, etc., and what we've been able to determine from that. So we've had 120,000 years at a minimum to develop the amylase, and actually it was already found at that point. So quite possibly several 100,000 years that we have eaten some sort of starchy material. And ours is what's called AMY1, which is the alpha type. There's alpha, beta, and a third. So dogs have the beta type. So dogs have between 2 and 8 generally. Some have a little bit more copies of the amylase, and that's pancreatic, and the AMY2B, not 1. And it goes back around 7,000 years. So dogs have only had about 7,000 years to develop amylase, therefore, or the copies from it. Here is a chart, and I'm going to enlarge this again so you can see a little better. And you see the first dog at the top is the dingo, and you see the number of amylase copies that they have, 2. Here's the Siberian Husky. They have 1 plus sometimes. So you've got the Greenland dog. So dingo, virtually nothing. Greenland dog, Arctic American dog, which is like our Native American dog, has a lot more copies. Siberian Husky, virtually nothing. So there's that. You've got the Arctic Asian dogs, the pug, the Samoyeds, Solosinquitlis, Lycas. So the Lyca is basically a Siberian Husky. I'll put it that way. They're very, very close in genetics. Chinese crested, Chow Chow, Dachshund, and so on. You get up here to these larger ones. This is interesting because it is an ancient breed dog. It's a Saluki. They're sight hounds. The Saluki has been around for a long time, thousands of years, but it matters where they existed during that time and how long they've been with humans. There's the Laphund, which is also a long-term dog living with humans. So as you go on down the line, here's a German Shepherd, for instance. Many of us have that. So an average number of probably around 8 copies of amylase. So they can survive, but they're not very efficient with breaking down plant materials compared to our 20. Okay? So if we've got 20 copies literally from here to here, now all of these dogs have much less of that. And so they can't break down the starchy plant materials the way that even we can as an omnivore, and that's still not good for us. Okay. Now here's an interesting chart of dog amylase geography. If you look at the different breeds, the Lycos, the Huskies, and all of those up north, essentially Siberia, but some down into the steppe areas in Central Asia, you've got, that's the average number of amylase copies that those dogs all put together have, 6.4. That includes the Husky being 2 or sometimes even 1. So the other dogs are making up for it by their copies. You look up north in North America and Greenland, so between the Greenland sledge dog that's got 2 and the Malamute that's got 2, the rest of the dogs up there raise that up to about 3.7. You look at Australia, where the dingoes are and exist, it's 2.2 because there really aren't any other native dogs there. But you look through the rest of the central part of the world around the equator, where grains were grown for the past 11,000 years or so by humans and dogs living with humans, the dogs had to learn genetically to survive with us, and the ones that were able to process starches to survive survived, and those are the ones that went on. So that's why they have the average number of copies from 8.5 up to 11.8. And you notice that in Europe, it's the highest number of copies of the breeds. So depending on where they lived on Earth and living with humans, being able to be fed by humans, then the copies of amylase were necessary for them to survive in agrarian societies. So when we grew grains, tubers, and other types. So what nutrition is best for dogs? Okay. First of all, protein sources. They have different amino acid profiles for plants versus animals. Animal proteins are considered complete proteins. Plant proteins are considered incomplete proteins. But if you look on, for instance, processed dog food, they just list proteins. So they add the plant and the animal proteins together to get the overall level of protein they say is in that canned food or bag. So you have to know really what you're looking at in the ingredients. That's why we're going to this depth, okay? So amino acid compositions, animal proteins contain all of the amino acids essential to dogs in the amounts that match their overall health, maintenance, and growth. Plant proteins, corn gluten, soybean oil, plant protein isolates, they lack arginine, taurine, lysine, tryptophan, and amino acids essential for health. So none of those plant-based things contain any of those that both cats and dogs, by the way, need. They can't produce those things themselves. So those amino acids are absolutely necessary, and the only way to get them is from meat sources. So protein digestibility can be broken down into smaller, easier to absorb components. Animal fats are essential. Dogs do not suffer from cholesterol or heart disease caused by animal fats. That's us, not them. Provides a concentrated source of energy and supplies essential fatty acids such as omega-3s that dogs can't produce on their own. By the way, omega-3s, 12s, 6s, those are all extremely necessary in their diet. And omega-3s is one of the things that we will talk about pretty heavily down the line here, because lots of issues with EPA, BHA, and all that. Okay. So the optimum range is 15 to 18% of fats. You can't get that out of kibble as the best source of energy. So fats are a slower source of energy than carbohydrates. So in other words, that blood spike when you eat grains and potatoes and bread and all that stuff, that blood spike is because it's easier to get that energy from carbohydrates than it is from fats. So that's a slower source, and a kind of a leveling device, if you will, a balancing device. And dogs as a pure predator, they weren't designed to have that spike of sugars and energy in their bloodstream. So plant carbs create an excess of lactic acid in the muscles. Lactic acid is created, for instance, when you're doing some heavy exercise over and over again with certain group of muscles, that lactic acid builds up because it doesn't pump it out fast enough with how you breathe and what you're doing. So it builds up, and that's what weakens you. It's not that has nothing to do with stamina. That's a physical aspect. And so that's what's going on. It creates weakness and an early fatigue because of the lactic acid, rather than being able to transfer carbon dioxide versus oxygen to all the cells in your body, the muscles. Okay. Most essential fats need to contain linoleic and arachidonic acids, which is omega-6s, the DHA and EPA, which is omega-3s, and have to have a balance of fats. The ratio of 2:1 to 5:1 of omega-6 versus omega-3 fatty acids. That's important for you to remember. Some places have revised it 2:1 to 4:1, but it's okay for 5:1 at certain points. What I'd like to teach you is how to see what you're looking at with your dog and see how to feed it when it needs those things. It doesn't need everything all at the same time. You have to supply the body with what it needs to survive best at the time. So omega-3 fatty acids, there's 3 types: ALA, and that's alpha linoleic. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. My brain's ahead of my mouth. Linoleic acid and is from plants, the short chain, and cannot be converted to usable form by dog digestive systems. Okay, I'm going to repeat that. It's short chain sugars and complex carbohydrates cannot be converted to a usable form by a dog digestive system. Those come from flax, sunflower, canola, coconut oils. Okay, and you say, well, flax is used a lot, so is coconut oil. So they must have some benefit, and they do, as a medicinal aspect, but not as a nutritional aspect. We'll get into some detail on that later on. DHA and EPA are from fish mainly and can be used directly. DHA and EPA are long-chain omega-3s and are absorbed easily. Salmon, herring, and whitefish are the best sources and required by dogs. By the way, krill oil is also an excellent and probably a better source of omega-3s. Omega-3s are less common and need supplementation. The EPA amount is critical in that. So when you feed your dog, regardless of if you feed raw or not, if you're not feeding a supplement of salmon oil, krill oil, or those types of things, you're probably not getting enough omega-3s to your dogs, right? And certainly with processed foods, you're not. So you have to supplement those. So this is what's best nutrition for dogs. This is an ideal type thing. Carbohydrates, you want as few as possible. Simple carbohydrates are sugars. That's corn, rice, and wheat. And years ago, guys, the dog food industry, in kibbles, you have to have some sort of material, generally a plant type material that acts as a binder once it's heated, right? So you cook the meat with a binder and it creates a kibble form. That binder used to be corn because it was the cheapest thing on the market. And for many, many years, I was saying so many dogs get cancer and ask what they fed their dogs as my clients for years and years and years. And the ones that had corn-based kibbles, much higher incidence of cancer. So what I surmised without studying it myself in a laboratory was that the corn was both an irritant because it couldn't be absorbed, it couldn't be processed at all, but it also had very high glycemic index, and it was absorbed immediately into the body as sugar. So the body is constantly fighting that sugar spike. As a matter of fact, so it's absorbed directly in the bloodstream, causing a spike and then a sharp rise in insulin to convert to fat when not used immediately. So if you eat a simple sugar and you have a sugar spike, if you are working out heavily, like running for your life, you might use up that energy, but you'd have to run a long time to do all of that. Otherwise, insulin comes in and is converted to fat. So a rapid drop in sugar level then causes hunger and weakness. So the more carbohydrates that you eat, the more hungry your body says you are. Complex carbohydrates are potatoes, beans, and other vegetables and fruits. Complex carbs take a long time to break down in the stomach or pass through even undigested, creating very large stools. So when your dog poops out a lot, it means you probably have a lot of complex carbohydrates that can't be processed and broken down. Natural diet contains almost no carbohydrates. Excess carbs cause diabetes, obesity, and insulin resistance. They are a great cause of joint inflammation and other maladies. More than a minimal amount causes the body to store as fat and is built upon. And studies show no amount of carbohydrates is necessary for dogs, 0. Since prebiotics, now we will talk about pro and prebiotics here in a minute, but since prebiotics are sugar and sugar feeds yeast, which is in your body, and other opportunistic pathogens in the small intestine, the pets with yeasty guts can get much sicker from ingesting prebiotics. So be careful looking at your dog. If your dog has flatulence, bloating, all of that stuff, it's got a yeasty gut. In other words, there's a lot of yeast. And yeast are animals, not microbes. Okay. So what's best for dogs? Rich in animal protein. 70% of the protein at least needs to be meat forms. A variety of meat sources, low in carbs, no high glycemic cereal grains, and the worst is rice. Fats from animals, you need meat and fish, not plants. Fruits and vegetables, no more than 2 to 5% each meal. Don't oversupply calcium and phosphorus. I'll get into all these different minerals here in a little while. High protein does not cause kidney issues. There's so many wives' tales about high protein causing kidney problems. It doesn't happen. It doesn't cause it. There's been many studies. It's about protein quality, not the quantity. Excess protein is eliminated through urine naturally. So it's just additional. It doesn't cause any problems. Protein intake requirements increase for older dogs by up to 50%. So if your puppy at a minimum needed 28% protein, minimum, and a mid-aged dog or an adult dog needs somewhere around 21 to 23% protein, an older dog is going to need 30, 35%. And that happens whether the dog is exercising or not, frankly, because it's the atrophy of muscle mass. So as you would think, fresh meats have the highest protein amount, up to 96.7%. Frozen meats lose some of the proteins, and rendered meats much more, down to 79.2%. So you're losing about 15, maybe 17% if from rendered meats. Rendering means to kind of cook them to death, essentially, make a soup of it. But even frozen meats lose some of the protein aspects, and not much. It's still up in the 90s. Botanicals are important for eliminating toxins in the organs and body. So herbs have vitamins, minerals, and phytochemicals. Those are necessary. Again, we should keep those to a very low percentage in the dog's food. Calcium, so in other words, bone matter, ash, meal, stuff like that, should be kept to less than a maximum of 2.5% of the total intake. And that's substantially less. That's the maximum it should be. So I would opt for around 1% for calcium at the maximum. Excess can cause stunted bone growth, because what it does is it oversupplies the bone and densifies the bone early on, too early. So it's used to maximum extent in many kibbles and dog foods because bones contain minerals and are cheap. So in other words, the animal meal is a filler. So they put it out at the maximum they possibly can do under, AFCO, and that's what they do. Phosphorus amounts should be kept to well below the maximum safe level of 1.6%, again, in animal meal. So this is a comparative analysis of nutrients, protein, fats, and carbohydrates. The ancestral diet, in other words, what's out there in the wild, what should be normal, 56% protein, fats of 25 to 30%, and carbohydrates of 14%. Typically, dry dog food is only 18 to 32% protein. Fats are 8 to 22%, and carbohydrates are a massive 46 to 74%. So dogs are not getting the right nutrition if all you ever do is pour a bowl full of kibble of any type, frankly. Okay. So let's look at some foods for, this is protein biological value. Biological value isn't about the amount of protein or levels of protein, it's protein ratings. And if you heat it, if you have high heat and the longer you cook, it lowers the protein in each one of these by 15 to 20%, a massive amount. So eggs and protein biological value have 100. I use raw eggs in my dog's food quite often. Egg whites 88, chicken and turkey is 79, fish is 70, lean beef is 69. Now, unpolished rice. I'm going to talk about rice. I've got a whole thing about rice later. Unpolished rice is 59, brown rice is 57, and white rice is 56. Problem with rice is it's higher glycemic index than even sugar is. Peas, which is a legume, is 55, whole wheat 49, soybeans 47, whole grain wheat 44, corn is 36, and dry beans 34. So corn, as even a protein biological value, corn was low on that in the first place. It was a horrible additive back in the day when they were doing kibbles, 40, 30 years ago, even up to about 20 years ago. So foods and benefits. So here's pork is the highest in thiamine, vitamin B1. I'm going to talk about why you rotate. Lamb has zinc, selenium, and B vitamins. That's very important for some specific breeds. It's low in omega-6s versus omega-3s, which is perfect because of that ratio that we were looking at, okay, that 2-to-1 to 5-to-1. Duck has selenium, phosphorus, and B vitamins. I use a duck formula as well. Chicken has selenium, potassium, phosphorus, and vitamin B complexes. Venison, as you guys know, game meals are lower in fats. So venison is lower in fats and lower in omega-6s versus omega-3s. which is at 2 to 1, which is perfect. And that's what you want. So venison is good for the omega-3 versus omega-6. Rabbit is when for dogs have allergies or yeast infections, it is very low in omegas. And the rabbit itself is such a dry meat that it doesn't feed into the yeast colonies. So those are important to know, other than beef, the normal things that you get. A lot of white fish or salmon, formulas, things like that. Those have different elements in them. But for these types of things, it's good to know these elements, okay? So let's talk about zinc. Zinc deficiency in particular breeds is extremely important. I will go over those breeds. And I've advised a lot of people over the years about zinc deficiencies in their dogs when they describe cracking pads on their feet and itchy and stuff like that. With those particular breeds, they deplete zinc very, very rapidly. So zinc's an activator for over 200 enzymes, nucleic acid, protein synthesis, very important, obviously. So in other words, they're not able to absorb nutrients or synthesize the proteins if they don't have zinc in their diet. Carbohydrate metabolism, so it helps rid the body of the problems with carbohydrates. It's immunocompetence, in other words, it helps the immune system. Skin and wound healing, and you see that when you change things. Cell replication and differentiation. So in other words, not the differentiation is about not creating cancers, so specific cells. Growth and reproduction. So zinc is a massive thing that we need to be aware of with dogs. Zinc deficiency causes skin and coat issues. It's also visible in paw pads and exposed skin areas. Have dull and coarse hair coat and skin lesions. Has fading coat color. So if your dog looks like it's not bright and shiny and deep in color, the coat color will go down. It'll be dull. So parakeratosis and hyperkeratosis are the two things that zinc deficiency causes. So excess zinc is when you see a calcium and copper deficiency, and you go, well, how do I know that? We're going to get into that. Breeds prone to zinc deficiencies: Malamutes, Huskies, Samoyeds, and some Collies. Also, some rapidly growing puppies, in other words, dogs that, so they the body outgrows the size for the need for zinc because of the rapid growth. And that's Great Danes, Dobermans, German Shepherds, Beagles, Standard Poodles, Rhodesians, Labradors. Those are the specific ones that we're aware of, but there are others in there too. These are the ones that are most popular out there. But if you have a rapidly growing dog during that puppyhood, make sure that you supplement with zinc. Okay. So high cereal / grain content foods cause zinc deficiency. So the more you have high grains, you're actually depleting zinc out of the body. Animal sources for zinc are much better, and they're easily absorbed and plentiful. If there's too much zinc, then copper needs to be increased. Too much zinc affects copper status and absorption. Your ideal ratio is 10-to-1 zinc to copper. Beyond that, you need to either reduce zinc or add copper. Feeding high content copper liver without correct ratio of zinc can cause copper toxicity. Evidences are loose stools, in other words, diarrhea type, bad skin health, fur loss, and skin infections that keep reoccurring. So that's how you know that copper toxicity is one of those elements. So you don't need all these medications for things like this. You need proper nutrition because the body takes care of itself. Phytate reduces the absorption of zinc. So grain, cereal-rich foods, and cheap generic kibbles create zinc deficiencies. Calcium and iron, too much calcium, in other words, eating too much of the raw bones affects the absorption of zinc as well. Zinc proconolate is most bioavailable supplement. It comes in tablets. For small dogs, that's too much in those tablets. So they have little zinc drops, and the ionic drops work well for the small dogs, just a couple of little drops. They have on each of the bottles, they have the dosage for the poundage of the dog. Okay. Other supplements that we can talk about: lion's mane is a neurotropic enhancer, promotes brain growth and health, keeps pathways forming in the brain and enhances the growth and keeping neurons healthy. Helps the hippocampus form short-term memory, especially good for older dogs to stay engaged in the world instead of just kind of fade off. Creates better cognitive function. They have better object recognition and memory. Has antibacterial effects plus many other health benefits. A teaspoon for every 10 pounds of weight in their food per day, especially for older dogs, helps against inflammation and potentially reduces the growth of cancer. And I put in there also turkey tail is known to reduce the possibility of cancer as well. I used turkey tail on Nellie. She lived 2 years instead of the maximum 2 months that they were giving her with a massive tumor on her. So that was one of the things that I did in her food every meal, not just daily, but every meal. And turkey tail helped.
With the mushroom.
Yes, turkey tail and lion's mane both are mushroom types. Okay, so it's powders. Wild salmon oil provides a direct omega fatty acids necessary for many health aspects. Omega-3s do not survive heat processing. So if you have, for instance, a processed food, a canned food, or a kibble that's heated to process, it does not survive that process. So they can say they added it in there on the packaging, but it doesn't exist in the food. So you always need to supplement omega-3s. So omega-3 fatty acids are EPA and DHA. And in wild salmon oil, they are triglycerides. This is important for you to understand. In krill oil, it provides the same fatty acids, EPA, DHA, but they are phospholipids. They're not triglycerides. And all studies that we've seen, they may be more easily absorbed by the body, as much as another 50%. They contain about 50% more antioxidants than salmon oil. And well, I'm not going to get into antioxidants because we'd be here all night. So they have lower triglycerides, and that increases the good cholesterol, HDL cholesterol in humans, but it also does so in dogs. And it lowers blood sugar. So the krill oil, when I've heard people with, for instance, Siberian Huskies that have digestive problems, that have lethargy, that their skin and coat don't look good, their paw pads, they have infections in their ears, stuff like that, I tell them to rotate between wild salmon oil one day, krill oil, and coconut oil. Those three things, and the coconut oil has a slight antibiotic action to it as well. So by rotating those each day for several weeks while you're adding other supplements that I'll talk about later, you give the body the best chance to fight those things. And everybody has come out much better. Within 2 weeks, it's all gone. So now, is fiber bad? No. And fiber is the carbohydrates. So fiber comes from carbohydrates. Mammalian digestive enzymes don't hydrolyze them or absorb them in the small intestines. So remember about breaking down carbohydrates with amylase, especially on our saliva. So our saliva contains 20 copies of amylase, And when we chew up that plant stuff, that carbohydrate, then we're mixing it all together to go into the stomach to our pH 4 to 5 to kind of help digest that a little bit. But even so, our digestive enzymes don't hydrolyze them or absorb them in the small intestines. It takes the large intestines. So plant dietary fibers include cellulose. That's a problem for dogs because they do not break down cellulose at all, even with their pH of 1 to 2. So a plant leaf, for instance, if you're adding greens in and you just throw a plant leaf in, they can't process that. So they're getting no nutrition from that because the outside layers of that cellulose prevent them from getting any of the nutrition inside the leaf. That's why you have to finely dice it to get those edges, because that's where it bleeds out from those edges. Okay. So we've got cellulose, hemicellulose, lignans, resistant starch, mono and disaccharides, pectins, and gums. The polysaccharides are fructans, which is inulin, and the galactans are mannans and mucilages. Okay, so those are the things that fiber comes from in carbohydrates. Animal fur and bird feathers are insoluble animal fibers, and they promote healthy gut when fed with raw feeding. A lot of people use pheasant bird feathers. They're large, they're clean, you can chop them up, et cetera, but you shouldn't use more than either the fur or feathers, shouldn't use more volume than the size of the dog's paw in that food. That's your gauge right there. Okay. Soluble versus insoluble. So can it be dissolved or hold water? That's what soluble versus insoluble means. How fermentable is it? And what's its water holding capacity? The word viscosity means how thick is it? How much does it slow things down? So high viscosity means that it's very slow to act, move, or be able to be absorbed. Okay. So soluble, can it be dispersed when mixed with water? Soluble holds water, it bulks up stools. So in other words, you have larger stools. So when would you use a fiber of any type? When your dog has diarrhea or a stomach problem, you would use fiber to slow that down because it's not broken down that way. It absorbs the water, holds it, and it bulks up the stool. So it slows the fecal transit time, promotes smooth passage of food through the GI tract, and is used when a dog has diarrhea. Examples of soluble things are pectins and gums, legumes, which are types of peas, oats, rye, barley, root tubers like potatoes, sweet potatoes, things like that, and root vegetables, psyllium, husks, flaxseed, and nuts. By the way, the nuts that we used to not recommend using almonds. We thought they were somewhat toxic to dogs, but I found that with as little as you should be feeding them anyway, they're actually not toxic. Almonds have a tiny bit of strychnine in them, and you would have to eat probably your own weight for it to affect you. But actually, the worst nut that I know of, what we would call a nut, besides peanuts, because they're really not nuts, they're legumes, would be the walnuts. Black walnuts are not good for dogs, so don't feed them black walnuts. Okay. Meat parts of fruits, not the skin. The skin of both fruits and vegetables basically have toxins in them to prevent them from being eaten by insects. So those toxins go into us, cause inflammation, etc. They're really bad. They're worse for dogs than for us, and it's not good for us. So the applesauce, apricots, the meat part, avocado is actually pretty good for them, not the seeds. Banana, carrots, eggplant, garlic. High levels of garlic can be toxic, guys, but a little bit of garlic is actually good for them. It's strange. green beans, melons, oats, potato, pumpkin, zucchini. Now, sweet potato is better, but again, has a higher level of starchy content. So anyway, okay. Insoluble fiber cannot be dispersed in water. It cannot absorb in water. It moves waste quickly as it pushes through the intestine. Speeds up rate to which the food passes through. It's used for constipation. So fiber can be used to slow it down or speed it up. Examples of insoluble fiber are beans, berries, brown rice, cauliflower, celery, corn, flax seeds, green beans, kale, kiwi skins, believe it or not, number of types of mushrooms, nuts, potato skin, and wheat bran. Now, the interesting thing about wheat or potato skin for both dogs and us is it's high in nutrients if you can break it down and absorb some of those, but it's also toxic, has toxicity to it. So they have high viscosity, so it's a resistance to flow. That's why it slows things down. It bulks up things too. Okay. So that's why it's used for constipation. So fiber uses slows the rate of digestion, increases satiation, it makes it full, you feel full, even when you're not getting nutrients. So it's beneficial for weight loss because what it does is it bulks up, makes you think you're full, you don't want to eat anymore, so you're actually absorbing less food. So it can be used for overweight dogs. Again, you got to watch the microbiome and make sure that they don't have yeasty, guts and stuff like that, or they actually have healthy microbiomes in their gut. But it's really beneficial for weight loss and also beneficial for coprophagia. So if a dog feels satiated by being full, it's not going to want to eat more. This is where I've recommended to a bunch of trainers over the years and clients, their dogs that eat their own poop, to overfeed them for a while. And you can use fiber to fill in so they're actually not getting fatter. So you can use that, fill them up, and make sure when they go potty, then you pick it up and it disappears. After about 2 or 3 months of that, the brain has changed. It no longer has that need psychologically or biologically. And so then you can go back to a normal feeding. So has high viscosity or resistance to flow, in other words, forms a gel. So it's a coating on the inner lining, which kind of smooths things out. So beta glucans, psyllium, and gargone, those are the things that form the gel. Low viscosity has more flow. That's wheat dextrin, bran, polydextrose, and inulin. I hope this isn't too much information, but I want you to know what you're working with and why. Okay, it becomes easier in a little bit. So fermentability is a very important thing. That's the rate that bacteria, yeasts, and other gut microorganisms effervesce, in other words, give off heat and break down material. The more fermentable a fiber, the less it will help with bowel movement. Okay. So rapid, in other words, effervescent, heating up. Rapid are fructans, including garlic, galactans, that's green peas and beans, mannans, mucilages, and some pectins. Results in more short fatty acid chains and production in a shorter period. Moderately fermentable are pectins and hemicellulose. Slowly fermentable are cellulose, some hemicellulose, and psyllium. Non-digested or fermented are lignin and flaxseed. Remember flaxseed later. Moderately fermentable resistant starch, enzymatically digested starch, absorbed are mono and disaccharides. Fermentable dietary fibers induce growth and or activity of special beneficial populations of gut microbiota and restore gut health. So this is the prebiotic. Fibers are what you use to keep the health of the little bugs inside your gut. So you have to have some fibers. They're not for nutritional aspect. They'll help the gut to be able to break down the meats and other foods that you put in there. Okay, so they have to be healthy for that to operate. Short chain fatty acids are produced, beneficial to the dog GI tract, and producing energy, keeps things moving through the intestines, and reduces inflammation and overgrowth of unfriendly bacteria. You want the bacteria that you want healthy, not the other stuff that takes advantage. Excessive fermentation causes flatulence, gas, abdominal distension, and diarrhea. So if you have excessive fermentation, could be copper toxicity, it could be the foods that you're feeding the dog, etc. So dogs with yeast issues should not be fed prebiotic fibers, as it makes their condition worse. So the prebiotics are what helps the yeast grow. Okay. Function of fiber, microbiotic independent effects. Fiber can increase fecal bulk and help regulate bowel mobility, constipation, or diarrhea, either one. Depends on which fibers you use. Microbiota dependent effects. Dietary fiber is working through the microbiota itself. So in other words, you need fiber to keep your gut healthy. You don't need fiber as a dog, especially the starches, for the food value. Okay. The speed with which the food passes influenced by the type of fiber. It either slows down or speeds it up. Fiber increases bulk, obviously, and because it's not processed. Prebiotic fibers increase beneficial bacteria, protecting the GI tract against colonization of pathogens. Those pathogens are opportunists, by the way. So if your gut bacteria is healthy, they won't have a chance to increase. And fiber itself reduces fecal odor if that's a concern to you. Okay. Types of prebiotic fiber: artichokes or heart meat, the heart meat of itself, bananas, chicory, wheat bran, and again, dosages should be less than 2 to 5% of the meal, in that range during those times of prebiotics. Fiber, good vegetable fibers are carrots, celery, parsley, parsnips, cilantro, Brussels sprouts, cucumbers, which by the way is also an antibiotic, natural, spinach, broccoli sprouts, mushrooms, and again, no larger dosages than 2 to 5% of the meal, the full volume of the meal. Fruits for fiber are apples, and again, not the skins, apples, banana, cranberries, pears, raspberries, and again, the same thing, total of 2 to 5% of the meal. Okay, so those are the fibers that you can use from natural foods. The best microbiome building vegetable fibers are arugula, asparagus, broccoli, dandelion, endive, escarole, fermented veggies like sauerkraut, green banana, Jerusalem artichoke, jicama, radicchio, radishes, and again, dosages of 2 to 5%, no more. Best fibers for non-fermentable bulk. So in other words, bulking up. Ground flaxseed, you work up to about 1/2 teaspoon for every 20 pounds of your dog weighs. Don't overfeed that. It'll cause constipation. So that's to slow things down. Okay. Animal fur and feathers, rabbit pelt, rabbit ears, lamb ears, cow ears, pheasant fur, no more than the size of your dog's paw. I mentioned that earlier. The best fiber for diarrhea is slippery elm, and you mix it basically 2 hours prior to meals. It creates a mucilage, which is a coating okay, a slimy coating prior to the meal to help bind as it passes through the colon. Okay. Half a teaspoon of powder with a half a cup of warm water. Stir it until it thickens, and then add only a half teaspoon to the dog's food, and then same portion prior to regular feeding. So about 2 hours before and during the meal. That's how you get rid of diarrhea. Best fiber when your dog has an overage of yeast in the stomach. Poorly fermentable fibers such as lignans, wheat bran, and cellulose can have a laxative effect, irritating the intestinal tract, creating mucosa, which is mucus, and water, which increases the water content of the stools. In other words, your body secretes that into the intestines and pushes that on through. So wheat bran should never be fed daily, ever. It contains phytin, which is a high level of calcium, which is slow absorption of minerals, including calcium. That's what it causes. Okay. Best fiber for constipation or balancing other things, and the bacterium in it. Coarse fibers irritate the GI, creating more mucosa, stimulating water, so it softens and moves. The fiber resists fermentation, so it moves bulk through the GI. It doesn't get processed, in other words. And psyllium powder, quarter teaspoon with two spoons of water for every 2 pounds of 20 pounds of dog weight. 20 pounds, yeah, not 2. Ground flax seeds, and this is where I said flax seeds are not good unless you need to use them as a medicinal aspect. Ground flax seeds are very good. Work up to a half teaspoon per 20 pounds of dog weight. Don't overfeed this. It will cause constipation again. Oatmeal, a tablespoon mixed with water for every 20 pounds of dog. So those are the 3 areas that you can use the psyllium husk, ground flax seeds, or oatmeal for that purpose. Okay. For glandular issues, the best fiber for gland problems, animal fur and bird feathers, again, no more than the size of the dog's paw at the time, ground flax seeds, and psyllium husk powder again. Imbalances in the gut microbiome lead to allergies, inflammatory bowel disease, IBD, that is, and diarrhea. So that's what your gut microbiome is, what helps you process things. And if it's out of balance, it causes all sorts of inflammatory things. Okay. Some of the things that probiotics help. Now, a prebiotic is helping the biotics in your gut that feeds them, essentially. The probiotics are the microbes themselves. So some of the things that probiotics help are skin, stress, poor coat, vomiting, weight problems, allergies, diarrhea, yellow stool, flatulence, stool eating, that's coprophagia, excessive shedding. In other words, not normal seasonal shedding for those dogs that have undercoats and blow their coats. Additional probiotics when these things occur. In other words, you want more microbiome in your gut. Normal intestinal balance may have been disrupted by drugs like antibiotics. Antibiotics will kill off tons of those of your gut microbiome. That's why you get diarrhea when you take antibiotics, because you're killing off all of those good things inside of you. So NSAIDs or steroids, any of those things will really disrupt that intestinal balance. Also, a dietary change or poor diet, exposure to pathogenic virus or bacteria, surgery, believe it or not, exposure to pollutants and allergens. That's huge, by the way, guys. So things like pesticides, chemical fertilizers on your yard affects your dog more than it does us, because they're in there and they lick it off their paws. Inflammation of the gastrointestinal tract and stress due to changes in the environment. And how many times do we make changes to our environment that our dog doesn't understand, doesn't agree with, and it's just a massive change. So those variables that we change all the time. Someone moves into the house other than you, your son comes home from college, you change locations, you change job, and it's a different time. Those are changes in the environment itself, right? So additional probiotics will help the dog feel better and be healthier. When choosing the best probiotics for dogs, give them on a daily basis. You also need to check the number of CFUs. That's the colony forming units. How many are in there? Colony forming units are the measurement of viable bacteria in the probiotic. You should get an item that has no less than 3 to 6 billion CFUs per dose. The best source of probiotics is a powder form. Pill forms generally don't have as good a success rate. And if I don't say it down here somewhere, they have to be refrigerated. And so the chain of custody of these things is very important. You've got a lot of online stuff that is not refrigerated and it's sent to you and it takes days. You're killing all of those probiotic. So some dogs are lactose intolerant, and even yogurt contains very little lactose. Some brands are lactose free, but you also have to look for additives like xylitol, which is highly toxic, by the way, and thus make sure that you always double check the ingredients of specific yogurt brands you buy for your dogs. Some of the tests that I've done is yogurt is very ineffective at providing probiotics in dogs because of their high level of acidity, and the biotics that are contained in yogurt don't seem to really survive being eaten in that. So the ones that you buy from in powder form have a better chance. Finally, even though yogurt does contain live bacteria, the amounts may simply not be enough. That's true, that they're certainly not 3 to 6 billion units per dose, especially if that yogurt hasn't been stored properly. There you go. In order to get your dog enough good bacteria through feeding yogurt, you'd have to go way above your pet's caloric requirements just by yogurt alone. So some of the powders, Maxi Digest is really good. Probiotic dry dog food, Farmer's Bounty, and Natural Balance, if you need those things at that moment. Dog treats, Zesty Paws probiotics, and Strelolab dog probiotics for treats. And then the tablets, 21st Century Essential, and Vetra Science Laboratories Vetra Mega Probiotic. So the powders, the one I suggest most is the Maxi Digest Floss. There are others, and if you want to ask a question which ones I use, I'll be happy to list that. Okay.
That was one of the questions.
Okay. So let's go into cancer causing issues here. We're making pretty good time, I must say. So mold spores, there's a high presence of mold spores in some dog foods, and it creates an aflatoxin, which generates a poisonous level of chemicals that encourage cancer growth. Researchers believe this is the cause of the majority of premature death and cancer in dogs. A lot of it is that the body has to fight against those spores. And anytime your body is in constant fighting form, you're going to cause the body to overtax itself. So pesticides is another one of those. The immune system, if it works overtime, cancers will happen. So since many of the grains and crops in pet food are lower quality, they are often soaked in pesticides that don't go away even with washing. Your dog might be consuming toxic pesticides, which have been connected to brain tumors and bone cancer in mice and a number of studies. Food dyes and additives, that's a big one, guys. Food coloring like Blue 1 and 2 have been linked in studies to tumor growth and other health concerns, but many dog food brands use them in their ingredients because they remain FDA approved. Monosodium glutamate, that's a horrible thing for us too. MSG has also been connected to severe reactions in humans, and findings show that the more MSG in canine food, the higher rates of cancer in the dogs who eat it. So while sometimes dog diseases, in particular canine cancer, have other causes, this is definitely worth looking into the ingredients in your dog food and understanding the brand and how the company's factory manufactures that food. Most of the time, the dog food recalls aren't about the actual ingredients. Sometimes it is. You remember the melamine scare a few years back when Chinese factories and plants were putting melamine, ground melamine into the food to bulk it up. And that had to be recalled, but it already killed a number of dogs here. So prevention through proper and safe nutrition is the absolute best cure. Overfeeding and wrong feeding. Let's talk about that. So obesity can lead to further dog diseases like degenerative joint disease and osteoarthritis. I talk about this in the puppy class a little bit too, because of the development of bones at that point. Overfeeding creates stresses on the body that it wasn't supposed to have in the first place. Cardiac disease, obviously, if you're overweight, it's causing your heart to overwork constantly, and it's just too much for it. Kidney disease, the overfeeding and wrong feeding. So the wrong feeding aspect of kidney disease is actually the starches, because the body overworks trying to get rid of all that. Liver disease and failure, same thing. Liver is your filter, your body filter. And so when you're wrong feeding, what happens is your body is in constant state of activity trying to, it basically wears itself out. Okay. Type 2 diabetes and insulin resistance. We've talked about the sugar spikes and the constant insulin necessary to try to keep that sugar spike from happening in the blood from starches. And then, of course, hypothyroidism. Had a number of dogs, by the way, when you test on T3, T4, all the thyroid levels, the AVMA and CDC, everybody else has changed those ranges over the years. If you look at the certain values, what is now acceptable as far as T values in the thyroid used to be up here, used to be down here, it used to be narrower, it used to be, so they changed those values based upon what they think it is. But even with low hypothyroid in range, I still recommend that people look at the medications for that before they, as they can change the diet in the dog as well. So, okay. Preventing this is possible and not very difficult. While regular exercises certainly are highly recommended for many other reasons as well, the best and easiest ways to prevent obesity is to feed the right type of foods as well as the right amount. Lots of people are overfeeding their dogs. Not any of you guys, I guess, because you shouldn't. So how do we see what our dogs should look like? Okay, our dogs generally are athletes, and they should look like athletes. They should not look like a horizontal lozenge or a minion. So watch your dog's waistline. That's the number one way of doing things. That inguinal area, the area between the floating ribs and the pelvic area and the leg, okay, the back leg, that area right in there, that should be concave. It should actually curve inward. If it's flat, your dog has too much weight on it. It needs to be concave as standing there. And when they eat, it even goes in, it sucks in a little bit more. If it's convex, meaning it pooches out this way, your dog's just plain fat. Don't do that. Okay. Don't hurt them by doing these things. You're not loving your dog by feeding them more. They are athletes. They need to be athletes. They need to be proper weight so that they can live longer and healthier, guys. Okay. So with that concave aspect, the other way is you should feel along your dog's ribs. And you should actually, if you rub like you do with your fingers across here, you should be able to feel every one of the ribs as you go by. You can do this. That doesn't mean that your fingers, sink in between the ribs, but you should be able to feel the ribs, not just fat. Okay. So there should be a mild layer of tissue over and filling in between the ribs, but you ought to be able to feel them. So those two areas are going to help you look and see what the proper weight for your dog is. Okay. When dog food shopping, look for filler ingredients that they use. I don't know anybody that uses corn anymore because there was a huge dust up about corn many years ago. And so what do they change? They changed to rice and wheat and soy and those types of things. Now they've seen, well, that's not much better than corn. So now they went, some still use rice, but again, as you saw, its value has protein levels they can count, but those aren't absorbed. And just because it's on the package doesn't mean that's what actually goes into the dog. Plus the high glycemic index, so the sugar spike, you're really killing your dog. So now they use legumes, a lot of pea material. In some ways, that's bad because of the toxicities in it. But depending on the percentage, it's actually not as bad as you may think. So not everything is either or, like garlic. Garlic is actually good for dogs in a tiny amount. So any byproducts or meat meals the company tries to hide, they name it all sorts of different ways, okay? But not all meat meals or byproducts are bad, guys. So look at it, understand, and I would even do some research on the company that produces that, their factories and stuff. There should be information out there. Everything is out there on the internet. Don't believe half of it, but do your research anyway. Okay. So anyway, those are the main culprits in the pet obesity epidemic, but also look at other ingredients like BHA and BHT. Those are preservatives in fats found in dog food. They're chemical based and they preserve it all right because the food can't be broken down. So the fat actually can't be broken down in the dog's body as well and goes through. So get dog food without these additives if you can. And I put there if you can. Carbohydrates, many dog food brands use rice, sweet potato, organic corn, or wheat, other carbohydrates to fill up a dog without using high-cost meat. These are somewhat prebiotics, but they really they spike the dog's blood sugar, and it's health-wise bad for them. This means our dogs can get carb loaded but receive little to no nutrition. So it's almost like you're starving your dog by overfeeding them the wrong thing. Get dog food with lean meat protein instead. So sugar, some dog foods and dog treats have started introducing high levels of natural sugars into their ingredients list. This isn't surprising because, of course, it makes the food taste better, even to dogs. But dogs don't process high levels of sugar very well. Sugar doesn't provide any value nutrition, and thus overfeeding is easy. Okay. So a raw feeding guide. Here's a raw feeding guide that's one of the best. It's been around a long time. And that is Wendy Vollard and Carrie Brown wrote this. They wrote the original one. This is the second edition of this book. And I think that's the only two that they had. Some prefer the first, some prefer the second. If you don't have this in your library and you haven't read it, you should, and you should really understand it. very good guide. I've had discussions with Wendy on several things, including the kidney aspect of proteins. Some pretty silly stuff. I'm not gonna, I am not a vet, okay? But I've had many as clients and I've spoken with many over the years. They generally, unless they specialize in it, they are not taught much about nutrition, okay? Which is odd because they deal with the rest of the body. So that's their admission, not a blast against them whatsoever, okay? So another one, Dr. Becker, she's written a couple of books, Real Food for Healthy Dogs and Cats, for simple homemade food. Simple is the key word here. The way I developed what I feed my dogs and have kept them healthy for decades is basically my clients, if I told them, I always ask my client, what do you feed your dog? That's one of the first, I think that's the second question on the questionnaire. And about 90% of the time I would tell them, okay, either give that to a shelter or throw it in the trash and go get this. And this was a protocol that I wrote out to my clients to give their dogs a better chance to feel good because they were in better health. And you know what happens when you give sugar to kids? Well, that's what most dog food does to dogs too. So they will behave better when they feel better and when they're balanced naturally. So I developed a method to, which I'll share a little bit about it, but it gives a much better chance. And then as I had conversations over the years with my clients, we could adjust those things based on a dog's age and needs. An adjustment is necessary, but what it does is it takes out not all of the notifications, because, and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying clients or even dog trainers are lazy, but we're lazy. We want to do what we want to do, and that's it. And we get used to these things that we get in patterns. And so we do X and that's it for years and years and years. Well, that's not healthy for your dog. You have to change things. And so what I've done is a protocol that helps change those things. And rarely does a dog then get into a bad situation. So another one is the brand new book. I don't know anything about it other than the people have told me about it, The Forever Dog. So I hear it's very good. I would suspect so with Karen Becker. Pretty good information. There are others out there as well. These are just three of many that are really good sources. Some are for raw feeding, some are for supplemental things. So, okay. So those three sources will help you to understand a little bit more about things, I hope, if you don't have them. So what I did was, especially back in the day when raw was not readily available, now you've got tubes of raw food that are frozen in your local pet store that you can go buy and, feed Fluffy something to some level. Back when I had, 8 to 12 dogs of my own, plus other behavior cases up to 7 or 8 in my house at the same time, sourcing and feeding raw was almost impossible. And when I had those behavior cases, when that dog left, those people, the clients, they weren't going to take the time, the money, the effort to source all the raw necessary things and understand raw feeding from the balances that it needs of, muscle meats, organ meats, bone, supplements, etc. Before they made it easy, it was difficult. It was expensive. You had to spend a lot of time sourcing things, and you had to blend it, mix it, grind it yourself, et cetera, et cetera. So I knew my clients were not going to do that. So what I tried to was about 200 different foods over the years. And again, I had discussions after I did it, actually, with Wendy, and she came up with exactly the same list that I had, that she said, these are okay, was her words, not good, but okay. I made them okay with other stuff. So we agreed, which made me feel better about it. Meant I was on the right track. So what I did was develop a system where I could use kibble for what it's good for, which are the additives that should be in there, a little bit of fibers, depending on which fibers and what brands, and some of the meats and proteins that they need. So it's got some stuff, but then I supplement it with, as you see there, there's a next to those bowls is a can, a very large can, as a matter of fact, of human grade salmon. And that's like at I bought that at Tom Thumb grocery store, which is a good higher end grocery store, in the meat section, in the canned meat section there, with all the tuna fish and everything else. And that was $2.95, which is less than you will buy fish dog food. And it's a larger can. So if you source your canned foods, your human grade foods, from Big Lots or dollar store or places like that are discount places that actually have those meats, those canned meats, there's absolutely zero wrong with that, and it's probably better than what you're getting your dog. So foods and kibble bases, I will go over what I do and how I do it generally in a little bit. Okay. We're already at 2 hours. Okay. So some of the dog foods, the kibbles that I recommend and use myself are Origin. Again, high-end, grain-free. They do it right. When they cook their meats, it's 2 to 5 minutes, so it's flash heated at 195 degrees. So it's a pretty low level. The hotter it gets and the longer you cook it, the more the protein goes away and it just goes to mush. So Origin does it right. The only problem with Origin that I've ever found was that the protein levels and some of the, I'll kind of call it greasy action, because it causes high level in some dogs, about 15 to 20% of dogs, it causes some diarrhea. And I'm not sure exactly what it is in there, but it's just too rich for some of the dogs' stomachs. And it may be that change, but I've tried it long term too, and it doesn't seem to go away for particular dogs. And it's not breeds, it's individuals. So it's just their particular genetic makeup and their gut microbiome that can't handle that level of Origin. If yours does, wonderful. That's a great source of a kibble food. Merrick, I have used it for years and years and years. They haven't changed the formulas to anything but American sourced foods, mainly in Texas itself. If you can get that, the grain free, they have 3 levels. They've got a grain included, they've got a grain free, and they have one that's called raw infused. And the raw infused is not worth the money, so don't bother with it, because it's dry, stuff anyway. It almost looks like what do they put those crunchy things in salad? The little croutons. That's what it looks like. So don't bother with it. It's just more expensive for no reason. And you're going to add fresh meats in anyway. We'll talk about that and the timing. So Akana is another one, the high end Akana, the non-grain, grain-free. all of those are grain-free kibbles. They're smaller sizes. And, since it takes a while to break down kibble in the gut, the smaller that size, the less time it takes to break that down. And you look at the binder makeup. So what plant source or other fiber do they put in there, and the amount? As you see, the soluble and the insoluble types of grains or carbohydrates, if it's insoluble, it's virtually impossible for the gut. It takes 19 hours for it to break apart to finally get anything out of it, or you're already about to poop, so you don't get any nutrients from it. So look at the type of binder and the makeup, the percentage of it. Okay. So canned foods, some of the ones that I use are Merrick again. This is the 100% or what they call 95 or 96% meat, because they have a few things in it other than that. So Merrick, Avengers, they're out of Chicago, I believe. Avengers family still owns it, I think. I'm pretty sure they do. So I use Avengers. I use Wellness. They're 96, 95%, 96%. Meats. I use Koa Koa and Maori are both out of New Zealand. And those are both very good. They're a lot more expensive. They're about $1 more per can if you can get them and find them. Ollie is another one that's really good. Waruva, Farmer's Dog, and Instinct. So none of these are a complete list, but these are the ones that I use on a regular basis for those sorts of things. And the reason I do that is because each one of them has a number of different sources of proteins. For instance, Koa and Maori both have rabbit, and they also have kangaroo. You can't get kangaroo here. So, and duck, they have different formulas. So there's a number of things that you can do with that. Okay. So this is, for instance, package that I'm using right now. This is a Kana, and this is the Wild Atlantic recipe. And it's actually really good. If I could blow that up enough down there at the bottom, you'd see the nutrients aspect. So no artificial flavors, colors, or preservatives added. No soy, corn, tapioca, or wheat ingredients. So they still have to bind it together with something. So you have to, if you're using a kibble, you have to kind of choose your devil, but you're going to change the percentage of that, because if you use kibble, you will also supplement it with meats anyway. Right. So some of the human grade foods, the proteins that I add in, canned or jarred, for instance, canned salmon, mackerel. Now mackerel you can source, it's really cheap actually. It's like $2.65 for a big can, or even less sometimes, $1.95 at Big Lots or one of those places. Problem with mackerel is you cannot feed it very often because it's in salty brine. So be careful about how much you feed. Once every other week would be fine, but more than that, you're probably putting too much sodium in their food. Vienna sausages is another one. I use baby clams, these cans of baby clams. Tuna, usually use the white albacore tuna, not in oil, in natural water. Sardines in water only, not in the oils, because the oils are soy-based and others. So don't use those, just the sardines in water. By the way, sardines are probably the best treat that you can give your dog, and it's probably, other than an occasional little bite of banana or a blueberry that I'll throw at them or things like that, sardines is the only treat I ever give my dogs. Canned ham, human grade. These are all human grade foods. Canned ham is great. Now, again, it's salty, so once in a while. Turkey, quail eggs. So any of these things that are canned or in jars. that are human grade meats. Watch the salinity of things and make sure you're not overfeeding that. Once, probably every 10 to 14 days is fine for the more salty things, but the rest of them are fine almost all the time. So these are some of the things that I use. You can see, again, albacore, mackerel, the Vienna bites, the salmon, baby clams. And those are frankly about the same cost as the dog foods, the canned dog foods. And you see every one of them, the ones, the salmon and the mackerel, that's larger than that wellness can in the back. So raw or braised foods for proteins that you can add into kibble. I use eggs, and we'll talk about eggs and the egg membrane and shell membrane in a little bit. But eggs, I warm them up and then I crack them into the dog food bowls themselves and mix them by hand. I mix everything by hand. I want the dogs to smell my smell in their food. I have my own reasons for that, but it bonds us a different way. So, but you leave the shell in there. I just break it up when I crack it and I put it in and I mix it. The shell, the calcium's good for them. And again, you're not going to feed that every meal every day. Okay. So chicken or beef organs, obviously chicken meat or any of the red muscle meats, fish of virtually any type is good. Although farmed fish for us or for dogs is probably not as good as you think it is. Tilapias, the East Coast salmons, those are all farmed fish and they're kind of nasty, frankly. So if you can get fresh caught like wild salmon, Pacific salmon is wild caught, things like that. I actually, when I go to the grocery stores, I look for the discounted fish and meats that have been there for a couple of days or a day, or at the end of the day, I go in late at night and I'll look for highly discounted pure meats and I'll buy those, whether it's fish or beef or chicken or whatever else, the ones they're trying to get rid of. They knock off 50%, even 70% sometimes. You can get a pretty good deal. Game meats obviously are really good, as you saw with rabbit and those. They're used for different purposes. And then the other thing that you can do is raw turkey necks. For my dogs, they're larger, and so they don't. I don't want them chewing on a chicken neck because they could swallow it whole, that vertebrae. But a turkey neck's larger, and so it requires them to chew on it. And the raw bone, if you guys don't know, and I know most of you do, if you chew on that, it breaks off just like it would if it were cooked. But cooked bones shatter and have sharp edges, and that will cause incredible damage inside. But the raw bones, if you don't cook it, if it's literally raw, you can source those from a Mexican meat market or all sorts of places. And the dogs are required then, because of the size, to chew on them, crunch them, which helps clean the teeth. Plus, that breaks off in non-sharp ways, so it's smooth edges, so it doesn't cause damage inside. So those are great treats, but they're also great for in the meal. Okay. I use some of the food broths. I really look at the ingredients on them. This is again from the grocery store Tom Thumb, which is a local chain here in Dallas-Fort Worth area. They're in areas other than Dallas-Fort Worth too, but this is where they started. And their signature brand is really actually pretty good stuff. So I source these beef and chicken broth, and I actually add that into most of the time into the kibble as well. So that helps them break down and digest. It doesn't dilute anything. So, okay. So normal supplements, some of the normal things that I use are New Pro. You can use Endurance, Missing Link. Endurance is Wendy Volhard's brand. There are others. You've heard of Dinovite. I don't know anything about the formula on it or what they use. I've used NuPro for many, many years as a normal supplement for digestive, zinc, glucosamine, chondroitin. The silver formula has more of that. They have a gold and a silver formula. So I just like the NuPro. I've got a 20-pound bucket all the time, and it's a powder that you put in. They have, by the way, they have a cup, a plastic cup, and they recommend a certain amount. Don't do that. Everybody wants you to buy more, so they're going to overfeed that. Actually, you only need about, for a 50-pound dog, you may need about a tablespoon once every 3 days. That's all that's necessary. So you don't have to break the bank doing those things. And that's the normal feeding cycle that I use, is once every 3 days, once per 2 meals. I feed twice. I don't feed once, I feed twice. Some of the dogs sometimes will refuse one meal or the other. That's fine. They're self-fasting, and they develop their own routines. So about a tablespoon of that NuPro Endurance Missing Link is about all that's necessary once you initially put them on it. What I recommend when you first put dogs on a better nutrition with supplements is the first 10 days, it's every meal. So that would be a tablespoon of NuPro or Endurance or Missing Link or whatever else you use once every meal for 10 days. Same thing with the salmon oil. Okay. So wild salmon oil, make sure it's Pacific salmon. Again, Wild Alaskan is the brand that I tend to use because I know how it's sourced. It's fresh caught fish. So wild salmon oil is great. It takes about half a teaspoon normally, once every 3 days again. When you first start them, same thing as the normal supplements like NuPro, where you would add about a teaspoon of the wild salmon oil for 10 days with the NuPro Endurance, et cetera, et cetera. Now, another supplement that you can and should use, because it's got a different, again, as I explained, it's got different omega-3s, the type that it is. So it's all indications, we don't have an exact study, but all indications are that it's actually about a third more easily absorbed, and it has about 50% more of the omega-3 fatty acids in it. So it's important to get, and that also has a slightly different type of omega-6. So wild salmon oil, krill oil, and then I show coconut oil too. And coconut oil is just for skin. These other things are brain function, body, all sorts of things. So that's what's absolutely necessary for all dogs, but especially northern breed dogs, because they're high level. They've developed, they haven't developed amylase to process starches. They've developed other enzymes in their stomach acids to absorb high fatty foods, fish, seals, etc. That's what they ate for 30,000 years. So of course that's what they need. So the omega-3s, omega-6, omega-12s, the fatty acids in the wild salmon oil and krill oil are critical to their survival, period. Okay. Coconut oil only if your dog needs a little bit of help on the skin coat, and then it goes away as far as I'm concerned. Food grade diatomaceous earth. So food grade DE, there's two types of diatomaceous earth. There are hundreds of places that is mined in the United States alone. The diatomaceous earth that those places mine is used for pool filters and stuff like that. the food grade diatomaceous earth, it has to say food or feed grade on the label. Otherwise, don't believe it and do not use it. It's not processed. It's not the same purity. So there's only 5 places that mine that for human grade use. And that's what you're really looking for, is food grade use. Okay. And if you've ever taken an antibiotic pill, you have had diatomaceous earth. That's the white stuff. That's the powder that they package together with all the rest of the ingredients. And that's all it is a very fine white powder. If you stick your hand down in a box of diatomaceous earth, you can barely feel it. It's such a fine powder. Do not aerate it. If it gets in your lungs, it bleeds your insides, because microscopically it's very fine particles that are very sharp edges. And that's its use, is to go in the body, and you want to eat it. The dogs, for the dogs, for us too. Diatomaceous earth has been used in the cattle and the equine industry as well for decades and decades as a natural dewormer. And what it does is, once it goes in with the food, it goes through the intestinal system, and those little tiny particles actually rid the gut of all that, in us, 2 pounds of garbage that just stays in your intestines. It scrapes it out, forces it out. It's better than fiber in that way. But it also scrapes off the dead cells on the inside of the intestines as they die and come out. So they die, these cells die, and then another layer of new cells come behind it. So this helps clean that out. And now the new cells that are responsible for absorbing the nutrition are there and available, instead of covered over by dead cells. So the diatomaceous earth, that cleaning is necessary. They also have selenium, silicone, other minerals in them that is absorbed into the body. And that's necessary. And it makes you feel better. It gives you actually better energy, because you can process energy a different way. So the diatomaceous earth is an important thing. Once again, first time use, that's what I use with NuPro, salmon oil, and diatomaceous earth in the first 10 days. With NuPro and salmon oil or krill oil or whatever you use there, once every 3 days is all that's necessary. But with food grade diatomaceous earth, you only want to use it about once per quarter. So about once every 3 or 4 months is all that's necessary, for about 3 days is all, and then done. Okay, because otherwise it just goes, it's a waste. And I wouldn't put more than a teaspoon for a 50-pound dog. And if it's a 100-pound dog, I wouldn't use any more than a teaspoon anyway. Okay, it's inactive material. Okay, it's inert. Oh, and by the way, what they use diatomaceous earth for, have you ever seen roach proof? So roach proof, what happens is, if you put that inside your walls, if you put diatomaceous earth inside your walls, bugs will their legs will get in there, and then it actually gets in between their joints, and it cuts their joints, and so it opens them up and they self-desiccate. So all it does is just a little tiny grinding thing. It gets in their breathing pores too, and insects, and it kills the insects. So gets rid of insects. That's what roach proof is about. And that's what diatomaceous earth does too. So probiotics, obviously the powders, pills, yogurts, again, check the ingredients on that. Powders are best, especially if they are refrigerated. So do your research on that. Blueberries are good. I use once in a while, probably once every 5 days or so, just 2 or 3 blueberries. I will crush them. I will get rid of the skin, and I'll put that, and I'll mix it in with the food. Leafy greens, the best ones are dock, poke, spinach, dandelions, and if you have lamb's quarters around. So dock, poke, dandelions, and lamb's quarters, people think of as weeds, but they are highest in nutrients and iron. much higher than spinach. So you can substitute spinach for that. As you saw in the fiber aspect, I would not use kale as the leafy greens. That's not what it's used for. It's more of a fiber thing. The leafy greens, what you want to do is you want to chop that up finely, like you would dice something very tiny, because again, can't break down cellulose. So what it does is it bleeds out from the edges around. So the more percentage of edge you have to that particle, the more nutrition you get out of it. And that's what you need to do with those. Okay. Cortisone is an sorry. My mind went blank. Antioxidant. It does other things to the body. If you have availability to cortisone, curcumin, any of those types of things, that works on humans pretty well, actually, as antioxidants and supplements. You can use most of those on dogs too. Okay, but these are the things that I use normally with my dogs. So this is New Pro. If you don't know what it looks like, this is I think a 20-pound bucket, and it does have glucosamine. This is the wild Alaskan salmon oil that I use. Again, EPA and DHA are the omega-3 fatty acids. So, and there's the end of that part. But now I'm just going to talk to you. So I'm going to stop sharing here. Good. And I can see all of you guys. Okay. So that actually went faster than I thought, which is good. That means we can get into these other things. So let's talk about eggshell membrane. Okay. So eggshell membrane is the small inside thin layer of the inside of an egg. Okay. It's almost paper thin, but the point of the membrane to the chicken itself, or turkey or duck or whatever you're talking about, is to deliver all those nutrients from the shell and those sort of skeletal nutrients to the bird. So it's the delivery system. So an eggshell membrane for dogs is beneficial because it basically contains everything that any mammal consuming it, including a dog or a cat, would need to maintain 70% protein, and that protein is collagen. So that's a great source of collagen for dogs, and that's why I break up that egg and that shell.
You're getting sound break up a little bit.
Oh,
Not sure if it's a connection issue with you.
okay.
2 people have mentioned it.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Let us know when it's back, if it's working. Your little thing on my screen was red for a second. Now it's going back to, it says it's better now.
Okay. All right. Would you mind checking Sandy and see if she's got her computer off?
Okay.
That's usually the problem, is the bandwidth is. Oh, come here, Bosch.
How long do you warm the egg before
Here.
eating it?
There you go. There's Bosch. There you go, buddy. He's getting bored listening to me. I'm getting bored listening to me too. Okay, buddy. Let's get off. There's the buddy. All right. So if you'll check with Sandy.
I will check. I texted. She said yes, it's off.
Okay. Go ahead and open the door and let these knuckleheads out.
They want you to repeat about dogs eating the shell membrane.
Okay. All right. I will repeat that.
Thank
you.
It's a little intermission.
But yeah, intermission. It's a good way to put it. Okay. I'm about to lose my voice here. Sorry about that. Okay, so I'll repeat this. Eggshell membrane is the small thin inner layer inside the leg. It's the egg leg. That inner membrane. Well, anyway, point of the eggshell membrane is to deliver the nutrients from the shell that are not necessary for skeletal nutrients. So it's actually pulling from the shell the calciums and different nutrients from the shell itself to the bird itself. So the membrane for dogs is beneficial because it basically contains everything that any mammal consuming it would need to maintain or rebuild joints. Okay. It's about 70% protein, and that protein is collagen. So it's a perfect source for bones and joints. That's why when I warm up eggs, I crush that into the bowl, including the shell, which provides additional calcium as well as others. And close that door. Okay, sorry. So it provides the calcium, but also provides the collagen for the dogs to be able to help maintain their joints. You need collagen for many things in your body, but especially to maintain elasticity to help the joints. It also contains things like elastin, which is a protein that supports skin, cardiovascular health, cartilage, and spinal health. Elastin is what gives tissues its elastic tension and ability to bounce back after stretching. Amino acids, specifically desmosine and isodesmosine, the two amino acids responsible for the elastin's elastic properties. Okay. Glucosamine, chondroitin, and hyaluronic acid. You've probably heard recently about the amazing effects of hyaluronic acid for youthfulness. Well, those are all contained within this too. These are polysaccharides that support the connective tissue, interstitial fluids, in other words, between all the joints, and the skeletal structure of the joints to help with mobility, range of motion, and flexibility. All of these are relevant to the joints and maintaining joint health generally. So, okay. The moisture in foods is really important. And so why do dogs eat? Why do dogs eat soil? Why do you think dogs will dig into the soil and start chewing on the dirt and stuff? Okay. In a lot of cases, the soil itself contains probiotics and prebiotics that the dogs need. It also contains clay. And sometimes I will use the diatomaceous earth that's mixed with bentonite clay. The bentonite clay is an important part of the digestive system as well. Okay. Let me look through here just a second. Okay, based on duck eggs, because that's what I've done the research on, 320 megagrams on average per duck shell for that membrane. Milligrams, I'm sorry, not megagrams. What am I talking about? Depends on the dog what you need or what you want for that. Obviously, the larger the dog, the more you want. For instance, with Bosch being a large German Shepherd male and active, young, I generally give him about 3 warmed eggs in with his kibble with other stuff. Okay. So as far as amounts, let me back up a little bit. The ratio of kibble that I use to the meat food is anywhere from a minimum of 33%. So a third of the wet food, fresh, raw, canned food, et cetera, 2/3 kibble. That's the maximum that I use of that. And then the other supplements in it of the kibble, to about half kibble and half wet food. Those are the ratios that I particularly use because I like the effects of the better kibbles in my dogs. Now you say, so I had this conversation with Wendy as well, that, that raw foods are broken down in about 4 to 5 hours in a dog's stomach. Canned foods, canned meats, pure meats, in about 5 hours as well. And used to be the old studies that kibble took 19 hours to break down in the stomach. So you have different rates of breaking down that food, and the fermenting of the kibble in the gut was the problem. Well, that was because they were using corn, wheat, rice, all that stuff back then, which is highly fermentable stuff and wouldn't break down for a long time. Now they're using different things in it, and it breaks down much sooner and easier. So again, the effects for the fiber necessary to keep gut health, that's why I use the kibble the way that I do. And then the additional protein amounts that are needed. So it depends on the protein level that is in that kibble for the meat products, not the plant products. Because remember, they combine both proteins and call it X level of protein. So I'm looking at trying to get a certain level of protein in that dog every meal. That's why I again, look at the chart with eggs. Eggs is 100 on the chart, 100 named for protein levels. So eggs very high in that. That's great. That's perfect. So I can use 1 egg per about a half a cup of kibble, basically, for my Siberian Huskies, for instance, because Siberian Huskies eat less because their metabolism is different than other dogs. By the way, for you guys that haven't heard this in other classes that I teach, the advanced classes, Siberian Husky and the Greenland sled dogs have different genetic makeup than any other dog on earth. They are made up of they have a different wolf line 5,000 years ago in them. So they behave differently, they act differently, their metabolisms are different, etc., than any other dog on earth. So just so you know.
They want the ratios again.
Ratios of meat to kibble or the other supplements?
I think it was the meat to kibble.
Okay, so meat to kibble, anywhere between 1/3 to a half of the volume that you would feed your dog should be meat. That's the ratio I like to use. That gives me a protein level, especially the higher proteins. Okay, and then it still gives me the effect of all of the things in the kibble that are actually good and doesn't overdo it. If we look at all the things that say, okay, a little bit of this is good, but a lot of this is bad. So if we look at all that and we put that in the right formula with the higher quality kibbles, then we're actually kind of ahead. Now we don't have to add all this other stuff trying to make up for what's already in the kibble. That's my purpose and intent behind it, guys. And my dogs live to be 17 and a half, 18 years old. Even with, like Mia, she was 17 and a half. In the last 2.5 years, she had degenerative myelopathy. They gave her about a month to live when they diagnosed it. She lived another 2 years because of the nutrition. Nutrition is is everything for health. Now, I don't know why the medical community, both for humans and dogs, wants to rely on medications, because it's all about nutrition. Your body is made as a machine to fight off other things if you have the right nutrients. Okay. Any other questions before I run on with other stuff?
About a million.
About a million questions. Okay, well, maybe I'll answer those later.
We do have a question.
What categories can I?
Tiffany's wondering what time class time is set to end. Just
Originally about 25 minutes from now.
so at the top of the hour.
Top of the hour, 9 o'clock. 9 o'clock our time. Okay. All right. So it doesn't hurt to sometimes just have them, not only hurt, it helps to sometimes just have a pure protein source. Okay. Processed meats, probably I wouldn't use them as much as, and by processed, I mean something like ham that's heavily processed. Straight pork, I would probably cook to a certain level, but again, lower heat and shorter time to cook keeps the proteins higher. Okay. So if you have, I wouldn't trust a lot of chicken or pork to go very raw for very much time. Also, if you're going to have, I'll take, for instance, chicken livers and gizzards and stuff, and I'll braise the outside of them. The braising, it really doesn't matter much. I don't see many dogs, there's these salmonella scares in different dog food places. That's from the molds and all these other things that happen in places that are processed and they aren't taken care of well. So those salmonella scares are really for the humans, not for the dogs, because most dogs, they eat that. A pH of 1 is going to kill the salmonella. So it's really about us. So when I braise the outside, it's more of me handling the food and other humans handling that food at some point, even washing it off. There's still something there. So I'm just trying to braise the outside, leave the rest of it raw for those meats. And you can, I probably once or twice a week, their meal is going to be nothing but pure meat, because I've got the other supplements and everything else all the rest of the time. So I'm making sure that they've got a good high protein source. That also helps the gut rest for a while. Okay. And having the gut rest is very important. Now, one of the other things that I do, I guess before I get into this other, one of the things that I do, guys, is this is an important concept for you. So I change, if I'm using kibble, which I do because so I try to make it as simple as possible for everybody to follow this. Kibble's easy source, right? It's convenient. Canned meats are easy. Open the can, pour it out, done, right? And then a few supplements, you can remember once every 3 days to do that. Set yourself a timeline. That's about how easy it is to get your dog a lot better nutrition. Okay. Once in a while, if you got some, spinach leaves or something, just go, oh, the dogs need that, chop it up, put it in their food. It doesn't have to be something that is, that takes a lot of your time. And that's why I developed this for my clients. So what I do is make sure, here's the problem. So there are, DCM and some other things. There are a lot of scares out there that happened. There's a lot of misinformation. If you, and the studies are, well, if you feed your dog X for its whole life, it's probably going to have some bad problems, health-wise, structurally, et cetera, et cetera. And that's like if you ate McDonald's fries every day of the week, every meal for your entire life. You would look bad, you would feel bad, and you'd probably act badly. And so what we want to do is give varieties of proteins, which dogs need, because they're slightly different than wolves in their digestive system. Not much, but slightly. They have more, generally, again, other than the ancient breeds, they have more amylase, so that it's the body can absorb certain aspects. Okay, so every week I change the protein base kibble: fish, duck, buffalo, beef, duck, etc. So for what I've found over the years is if you have one kibble this week and you go through 3 more, and then you use that kibble again in that sequence, that 1 month, or actually 3 weeks that you don't use it, those bugs in the gut are still healthy to process that protein 3 weeks later. What happens when people change kibbles formulas, they've fed that for months. And then what happens? The dog gets diarrhea, right? That's because those bugs that would process that other protein have died out. So when you change per week, what you're doing is you're creating that healthy environment for all of those proteins to be processed. So I'll use 4 different protein sources in the kibble. I'll change them week to week, and I rotate those. I don't use chicken for that at all, because just chicken in this country, especially by a kibble, it's a pretty nasty meat source. Just go to a chicken processing place sometime. Okay, a lot different. And the other thing that I do is then through that entire time is I change the protein that I add, the raw food or the canned food or the egg or whatever other protein, high protein source, pure protein source that I have. I change that every single meal. So now my dogs are getting lots of different lots of different protein sources and a lot of nutrients from those. So it balances out. If you go back to where we said, here's what rabbit's for, here's what this is for, here's pork, here's this, vitamin B1, all these other things. Now you're giving that to them normally throughout the entire time. So they're not devoid or deficient in any type of food source or mineral. And that's really what it's about, guys, is to balance it out. Okay. If you get lazy and you just feed one thing to your dog all the time, your dog's going to be unhealthy. You're going to visit the vet a lot. You're going to wonder why your dog is farting a lot, has yeast, has problems, infections in the ears and stuff like that, those recurring things. That's because of nutrition, because you're not giving the body what it needs to fight off that stuff. And that's really what it's about. Okay. So, chocolate. I just saw that first one.
What do you do if your dog gets chocolate by accident? My dog was a stinker and found it in my zipped backpack.
Okay, so mostly it's going to be a sugar high from most human chocolate bars and stuff like that. The caffeine is the problem in chocolate, so that's the reason coffees and tea and stuff like that. The caffeine causes the heart rate to go just like this. Okay. And you would have to go to the vet, get a beta blocker to lower that heart rate down. Otherwise, you're gonna have heart failure. But there's not enough chocolate, honestly, in a milk chocolate candy bar to really bother anything other than maybe a 2-pound teacup dog. So any dog of any size is not going to be really affected by that. They may have a little bit of a sugar high and a little elevated level of the heart rate. That's about it. But it's the caffeine that kills them. So when Toffee was a young pup, not Toffee, I'm sorry, when Callie was a young pup, about 8 years ago, she was all of about 5.5 months old, and my wife went to the store, brought stuff in, set bags up on the counter, and went out to the car, came back in, put everything up, and then didn't realize she she bought a bag of 11-ounce bag of M&Ms, I think it was, to bake into cookies or something like that. And it was dark chocolate. And that's worse because it's higher level of caffeine. That's the oils and everything else in that. Well, she didn't notice that it wasn't there. And as she went upstairs, then Callie threw up in front of her. And then she found the bag all torn up. And then she kept throwing up. She called me. I was at my office. She called me. And I told her to get her to the vet immediately. She did. Well, even with beta blockers, and 2 days later, when she came back, her heart rate was 220 beats per minute, even with that. And so we almost lost her with that. That was, of course, she was smaller then. She was probably 25 pounds and ate 11 ounces of dark chocolate. So it's a killer if you don't take care of it. But a larger dog, anything over 20, 25 pounds with a candy bar, yeah, it's probably not going to be bad for them. It's not going to, it's not toxic or anything else. It's the caffeine that causes the problem. And that's from all the vets that I know. Okay. Anyway. All right. Let me handle this. So I wrote a little thing that says, can dogs eat rice? So instead of saying can dogs, how about should dogs eat rice? And probably, so physiologically, a dog can digest rice. The rice doesn't contain fat, salt, or cholesterol, loaded with carbohydrates that provide energy, right? But rice has a higher glycemic index, in other words, a sugar level, than sugar itself, the way the body processes it. So dog has plenty of meat, healthy fats, and some nutrient-rich vegetables and fruit. He doesn't need carbs. And that's all rice is. There's no nutrients in rice for a dog at all. So it's a cereal grain that dates back about 5,000 years. And you noticed in that map where in China and that area, Southeast Asia, high level of dogs that had amylase, right? So the dog levels, the copies of amylase was pretty high. I believe it was close to 11 in that area. And that's because rice doesn't mean it's good for them. It just means that they learn to adapt and survive on it. Edible type of seed from grass, thousands of varieties, other types of grain, wheat, oats, corn, barley, rye, etc. So what are the nutrients in rice for dogs? Carbohydrate, so it doesn't have a lot of the nutrients. Dogs don't eat carbs. There's better sources for carbs for that. Brown rice has more nutrients than white rice. And when they used to change the formula from corn to rice to then brown rice, at least you're getting a little bit, but it was still bad for them. Fiber, manganese, small amounts of iron, B vitamins like niacin. But when brown rice is milled, the milling removes the outer bran and germ, along with most of its fiber, iron, and niacin, leaving a grain of white rice with even fewer nutrients. Then it's enriched with additional nutrients like niacin, iron, and vitamin B, like folic acid, to replace those. And finally, manganese is a mineral important in a dog's growth. in brown rice, a half a cup provides 48% of the recommended daily intake for people, but white rice has less than half at 13. So dogs don't get anything out of that, by the way. Brown rice is higher in antioxidants and essential amino acids, but so are leafy greens, vegetables, and meat, poultry, fish, and eggs, and a lot fewer calories, guys. Does rice affect taurine levels in dogs? You guys have heard about taurine recently, the past few years over DCM. You probably never knew it existed before that, okay? Yeah, it does have an effect. So rice affects taurine levels, but not in a good way. Blood taurine concentrations are lower in dogs fed diets, including whole grain rice, rice bran, and barley. Found that the lowest taurine levels were seen in dogs fed lamb or lamb meal and rice diets. In addition, they found that blood concentrations for methionine and cysteine are also lower in dogs fed a diet of animal or turkey meals, as well as whole grain rice, rice bran, or barley. These are essential amino acids obtained from a dog's diet, and both are needed, including cellular function with productions of different glutathione and taurine. Taurine is an amino acid needed for dogs for the eyes, reproduction, and actually, most importantly, the heart function. That's why you heard about it, was because these dogs that had taurine deficiency. Well, guess where you got taurine from? Meat, not grain. Grain prevents it. Okay. So everything they said was probably diametrically opposed to what was real. So, can dogs digest rice? Yes, dog has ability to digest rice and other carbohydrates, but functioning differently, and insulin is a problem there. So you're causing a diabetic dog is what you're ending up doing. And I've seen a lot of dogs getting diabetes lately. Most of the time. So it may be used for diarrhea, but there's other things, as you saw, that are better. The average starch and sugar content of meat, fish, eggs, insects, plants, fruits, berries, and vegetables is about 4%. That's the sugar. Okay. Most pet food, dry pet food, is 40% carbohydrates. So rice can increase the risk of diabetes in dogs. Why is there rice in dog food? It's a filler. That's what it is, guys. Okay. So
I've seen this question a couple times about regarding rice, and when your dog isn't feeling well, oftentimes you're told to feed them rice and chicken or broth or something like that. And so with this information about rice, like is that bad, or is this is it okay temporarily if it's like your base of your food?
So what it does is, again, as a grain, as a fiber element, when your dog is feeling bad, what it does is it fills up the stomach, it fills up the intestines, it stops the flatulence, which can be caused by antibiotics and stuff like that, because the gut microbiome is dying off inside with all of that. And so it soothes the inner lining of the intestines. That's what it's there for. Now, you're still providing a high level of sugars, and on a temporary basis, it's okay, but there's better ways to do that. That's why I gave you the lists of things to help with the diarrhea and the soothing, rather than the heavy grains like that. Okay. Good question, by the way.
Another one. Can you over supplement taurine?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Overdoing anything can cause problems. So that's why look at, the reason you eat what you eat and how you eat and what's available is because, that humans have done studies on what humans should eat. Now, much of it they got wrong in the past. especially when they wanted to sell a lot of corn and wheat and stuff, because that was grown in our country. And so that, remember that food pyramid that we were all taught, that was developed during World War II. And the original person that they, nutritionist that they hired to, the government hired to study that, gave them the wrong answer for what they wanted. So they fired her, and they got other people to go in and say, well, it's all this grain-based stuff, because that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to help the farmers to sell grain. And that's not what we should be eating, and that's certainly not what dogs should be eating, guys. So that's part of the problem. Is we're stuck in a lot of, here's the problem. There's so much information now that nobody knows what to believe. And anybody can put stuff out there and say, well, there's studies. Okay, well, what they do, use 3 dogs over two weeks instead of 500 dogs over 2 years and study it and get actual results. Okay, so just do your research and use a bit of common sense. And don't take my word for it either. I want you to read those other books. I want you to see, because it's a balance of things. Okay, there is no perfect thing. There's no perfect diet for you either. You have to figure that part out. What I wanted to do tonight was to share with you guys as much as I could about how the digestive system works, that dogs are predators and they are carnivores. They're mesocarnivores. They are not hypercarnivore. They can have some starch and process it. Doesn't mean they need it, but they can. But their bias is carnivore meats, okay? And that's what they should be eating. And actually it helps us too, because it actually allows the gut to rest properly and have the proper type of nutrition, elements, and your gut needs to rest. Otherwise, if it's always working, then it's an unhealthy thing. So, okay.
Question. Do you recommend changing everything at once, like 10 days for supplements, but normally changing food is advised gradually? Wondering if this is your approach or if you overhaul entirely.
What I've told my clients is basically throw that away, start new now. Go through the day or two of diarrhea because it, and be done with it, because oops.
Unstable connection.
Yeah. Are you still hearing me, guys? Okay. All right. So go ahead and do it. Get over that. And what you can do is you can use, say, the same meat source that you started with. You threw that away. It's going to change anyway, because the formula on those kibble and protein sources are going to be slightly different anyway. But you can ease that into it by using the same protein source for that first week, and then the second week, and then the next week. What you're doing though with the meats is changing protein every single meal. So what it does is it builds up that microbiome in your gut to when you do change the kibble, that source, then it's not going to be upsetting to the dog. Okay. Good question. So I know you guys have done, well, let's see, it says over 99 questions on there. It doesn't go beyond that. So
we have 5 pages of Word.
5 pages of Word questions. Okay. So what I'll do is I will look through them. I'll get Kinsey to look through them. I'll have her categorize them into different categories, and we'll try to answer a category of questions rather than each and every question. If there's something different, I'll try to do that there. Okay. And then what we'll do is I'll have Angela put it out as an email, a list, or something like that. So any of those questions, if I have my written protocol, but again, I wanted to explain rather than just giving you a written protocol that is static. I wanted to explain what I do, how I do it, and what you're looking at, the health of the dog. Okay. So I hope that helps a bit. I know it's probably different than if you've been through Wendy's stuff or talked to Karen Becker. It's probably different, and each one of us has a different reason for it. So, okay. And it is right up 9 o'clock. So I apologize for running out of time for what I wanted to tell you. I always have more than I wanted to do, but I think we got across the main points. So I appreciate your time. I hope you got a lot out of it. That is my fervent wish. And if you want to check out any other of our courses or information, the Institute is about being your university about dogs. Okay. So thank you guys and good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you guys. Appreciate it.
See you Thursday.
Okay. Yeah, I will.
Happy
All right.
Father's Day. Bye.
Well, thank you. All right. Good night.
Bye.
Good day.
Thank you,
Wherever you
Nelson.
are.
Thank you.
Adios, fall. Auf Wiedersehen.
Thank you. This was so helpful.
Good.
Thank you.
I'm glad. Thank you. Appreciate it, guys.